As much information as we can get, it would be helpful.
Yeah. Our office isn't very far from here. It's right down here on Gusset.
Okay. Well, let me.
We gotta put the dogs.
I gotta get some clothes on. What do you want? Do you want us to come to
Are we still fucking awake?
To the Rockledge office? Or
You guys are upset. We don't want you driving, so you could each ride with one of us. You just got one of some of the worst news.
On a tragic night in Florida, an entire family was wiped out in what police described as an extremely horrific crime scene. The suspect, Domenico Gigante, a man with a violent past who allegedly killed his own daughter, her mother, and 2 others. This brutal crime, sparked by resentment and rage, shocked the community and left 2 young children as the sole survivors. This is the story of how a history of violence led to an unthinkable tragedy.
Domenico Gigante, a man with a violent criminal record dating back to 2005, had a troubled past filled with domestic violence and aggression. He had a history of battery and cruelty to animals, a warning sign that he was capable of greater violence. Gigante had a strained relationship with his 15-year-old daughter, Chiara Terwilliger, whom he had fathered during a previous relationship with Constance Terwilliger. Despite being absent for most of Chiara's life, resentment had festered over the years, leading to escalating tensions. According to his roommate, Gigante had been venting about his frustrations with his daughter and her family on the night of the murders. At one point, he reportedly said, "I guess I am going to go over there and kill them all." His anger boiled over after learning of Chiara's death, something police believe was a manipulation tactic meant to gauge his reaction. Instead of expressing grief, he allegedly admitted to his roommate that he had shot his daughter 3 times. Police say Gigante took a weapon, got in his car, and drove to the home where Chiara lived with her mother. Surveillance footage captured his arrival, moments before gunfire and screams echoed through the residence. In a fit of rage, he shot and killed 4 people: his daughter, her mother Constance, her grandmother Glenda, and Michael Watson, another occupant of the home. Leaving behind a bloodbath, he calmly returned home as if nothing had happened. The nightmare unfolded when one of the surviving children, aged 6, managed to FaceTime a relative from inside the house. Through the video call, the relative saw the horrifying scene and immediately rushed to the home, keeping the child on the call the entire time. After ensuring the children were safe, the relative called 911, reporting the brutal murders that had just taken place. When police arrived, they discovered the bodies of 4 victims and the 2 children. Terrified but physically unharmed, Brevard County Sheriff Wayne Ivey described the crime scene as one of the worst he had ever encountered. Investigators quickly identified Domenico Gigante as the prime suspect after linking him to the victims. After police notified Gigante of his daughter's death, he showed little emotion, further raising suspicions.
Chiara?
Well, unfortunately, we found her deceased today.
What? Is this a joke?
It's not a joke.
Sorry. What? I'm, huh?
It's not a joke.
Oh, what happened?
We're still actively trying to figure that out. At this point.
Was she at school? What happened?
Like I said, sir, unfortunately, we're still trying to
Okay.
We wanted to notify the father.
I had the same questions you guys. Was she home? Was she at school? Did this happen at a bus stop? Is it because of her boyfriend?
Well, we would be hoping that you would be able to help us out with that as well. Would you mind coming down to the precinct and talking with us?
Not at this time. I need to process this. This is,
Dominic, they need to talk to you. You need to put. He has Asperger's, so he has a little bit
I understand.
of
That's
understandable.
We're trying to figure out what happened to your daughter, sir. And if you come down and talk to us, that will give us a little bit more insight.
Yeah, we're
So
trying
I
to
can't
piece
just sit
together
here
a lot of
and talk,
information.
You know, I got a table, the dogs are up, I could have a cigarette. I mean, like you said, I don't even know where to start with this. This doesn't even seem real. I'm sorry, Mom. Excuse me. This doesn't seem real.
You gotta go talk to them.
On behalf of the sheriff's office, we have to say
Jesus.
full condolences.
Are you gonna go with me?
She should be in school.
Yeah, she's supposed to be at school right now. I know she had the strep throat,
Bruce,
but I mean,
you could come as well. It would be helpful if you could as well.
I really do need someone to come with me. I'm sorry, I have Asperger's. I'm autistic, and
Would you be willing to come over as much information as we can get? It would be helpful.
And our office isn't very far from here. It's right down here on Augusta.
Okay. Well, let me.
we gotta put the dog.
I gotta get some clothes on. What do you want to do? Want us to come to
Are we still fucking awake?
to the
Well,
to the Rockledge office? Or
you
what?
guys are upset, and we don't want you driving. So you could each ride with one of us. You just got some of the worst news you could ever get, and we don't want
I
you to get into
don't
that.
even know where to start. I don't even know how to process this.
All right. Well, let me get some clothes on. What the fuck?
Authorities tracked his movements using surveillance footage, which placed him at the crime scene moments before the murders. Witness testimony from his roommate also confirmed that Gigante had openly confessed to the killings. On Wednesday afternoon, police arrested Gigante, charging him with 4 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. With a history of violence and an overwhelming amount of evidence, his arrest was swift, and he was taken into custody without bond. Following his arrest, Gigante was held in jail while prosecutors built a solid case against him. Given his prior history of violence and his on-record confession, the state moved to seek the death penalty. During court proceedings, Gigante showed little remorse, his expression cold and distant as the charges were read against him. Prosecutors emphasized the calculated nature of the crime, pointing to his statement before the murders as clear evidence of premeditation. The defense attempted to argue mental instability, but his recorded statements and deliberate actions weakened that claim. Surviving family, members and community members attended the hearings, devastated by the senseless nature of the killings.
Folks, I'm going to tell you that this is an extremely violent individual with an extremely violent past dating back as far as 2005, who should have never been on our streets where he could take the lives of this entire family. In 2005, he was arrested for domestic violence and battery. In 2008, he was arrested for multiple counts of cruelty to animals. In 2012, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon and aggravated assault. And I have said this before, that if you are the capacity of a person that you can harm an animal, you will hurt a human being. And this individual is living proof of that statement. He actually killed a dog by slamming his head on the table and then breaking his neck and then stabbed another dog. That's the level of violence that this individual possesses. As I said, he should have never been on the street where he could harm this family or anyone else. Our team has developed him as a suspect through various leads and evidence, and I could not be more proud of our team for the job that they have done. Gigante is the biological father of Kiera, the victim who was age 15 and was formerly in a relationship with Constance, the mother. Currently, he is at our criminal investigative building and is being prepared for transport to the Brevard County Jail.
While waiting to be transported to jail, Domenico repeatedly asked officers if he could speak with his roommate one last time. The roommate, who happened to be at the station then, was advised and agreed to talk to him while on video. The first thing Domenico asked was,
A judge ruled that Gigante would remain in custody without the possibility of bail, citing the extreme risk he posed. Psychological evaluations were ordered, but the weight of evidence suggested a brutal, intentional act rather than a crime of passion. Prosecutors prepared for trial, ensuring that the details of the horrific crime would be laid bare for the jury. With video evidence, witness testimony, and his own confession working against him, his conviction seemed inevitable. The trial of Domenico Gigante would serve as a chilling reminder of how unchecked violence can destroy entire families.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking into a really disturbing case.
Yeah.
It's a case of familicide out of Brevard County, Florida. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's a tough one, but we're going to be using news reports and legal documents to try to piece together what exactly happened. So we're talking about Domenico Gigante, the man who committed this horrific crime. And I think our goal today is to try to understand what led to this tragedy.
Right.
Without, we never want to sensationalize these events.
Of course.
I just want to provide some context.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially with a case like this. One of the first things that jumped out at me when I was looking at the material you sent me was that Domenico Gigante had a history of violence.
Yeah. And
it wasn't just like one incident. It went back years.
Yeah, all the way back to 2005.
Yeah, like battery and even cruelty to animals.
Yeah.
Which
that's a huge red flag, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a big one for me. When you see that kind of pattern of behavior, it's really concerning.
Yeah, and I think that's what we really want to explore today. You know, what are those patterns?
Yeah.
What leads someone down this path? And is there anything we can learn from this case?
Right. And I think it's important to note that, violence, it often escalates. It's not always a straight line.
Right.
But the more someone uses violence as a way to solve problems or to deal with their frustrations, the more likely it is that it's going to happen again and that it's going to be more intense. And the cruelty to animals specifically,
right,
that's a big one.
That really stood out to me too.
It suggests a real lack of empathy.
Yeah.
And that can be a precursor to violence against humans.
Right. And that's what makes this case so disturbing, right?
Absolutely.
This wasn't just violence against anyone. This was his own family.
Exactly.
And specifically, he had a really strained relationship with his daughter, Kiara Terwilliger.
Right. Yeah. The sources mention years of just resentment and tension between them.
Yeah. And I imagine family dynamics can be really, really complicated.
Complex. Yeah.
And when you have unresolved conflict like that, it can fester. And in this case, it led to something truly horrific.
Right. And it's tragic because, families are supposed to be our safe haven.
Your support system.
Exactly. And when that breaks down, it can have devastating consequences.
And, speaking of devastating, there's this chilling moment that happened on the night of the murders.
Yeah.
Gigante apparently told his roommate, I guess I am going to go over there and kill them all.
Oh, wow.
And he had been venting about his daughter and her family right before that.
So that statement, if it's accurate, it's really important because it speaks to premeditation.
Right.
In legal terms, premeditation means he thought about it. He planned it. It wasn't just a spur of the moment.
The crime of passion.
Exactly. It was calculated.
Yeah. And what's really eerie is that the police actually used that premeditation
Oh, really?
in their investigation.
Yeah.
So apparently they told Gigante that Chiara was dead
Wow.
before they'd even discovered the crime scene.
That's a bold move.
Yeah, it was a tactic.
Yeah.
They wanted to see how he would react.
Right. To see if he was genuinely surprised or if
Would he show remorse or would
exactly.
he just confess?
And what's fascinating is that according to his roommate,
Yeah.
he didn't show any surprise or sadness.
Oh, wow.
He just confessed.
He just said,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I shot her 3 times.
Yeah. It's just chilling.
That sends chills down my spine.
It really does. It suggests this just complete detachment from the
Yeah.
reality of what he had done.
What kind of person can do that?
It's a question that haunts you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Oh.
So let's try to piece together what happened that night. So he gets a weapon. He drives to the house where Chiara lived with her mother.
Mhm.
And the security footage shows him arriving just moments before everything went wrong.
Right.
And then you have reports of gunfire screams.
It's just awful.
It's just unimaginable.
Yeah, and the crime scene reports paint a very grim picture.
Right.
It wasn't just targeted at Chiara.
Right.
He killed her mother, Constance.
Yeah.
Her grandmother, Glinda.
And Michael Watson.
Michael Watson, right?
Oh, wow.
Another person who was living in the house,
Yeah.
all shot dead.
I can't imagine the terror
It's
that they must have felt
unimaginable.
in those final moments. And to make matters even worse, there were 2 young children in the house,
Oh, gosh.
both under the age of 6.
Mhm.
They survived, thank goodness.
Yeah.
But can you imagine witnessing something like that?
It's heartbreaking. It's difficult to even comprehend the trauma that those children must have experienced, you
Yeah.
know, and their ability to cope with something so horrific. It speaks to the resilience of the human spirit, but the long-term psychological effects
Yeah,
are a serious concern.
absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to believe that amidst all this horror, there was actually a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
One of the 6-year-olds, using FaceTime, managed to contact a relative.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
especially at that age.
I
To
know.
be able to think that clearly in that situation.
It's remarkable.
It really is.
And that relative was actually able to see what was happening through the video call.
Oh, wow.
And they immediately called 911,
Oh my gosh.
but they stayed on the line with the child the whole time,
Oh, that's amazing.
just offering reassurance, keeping them calm.
Wow. What a brave relative.
Yeah, I mean, they really potentially saved lives.
Absolutely.
You know, they got the authorities there so quickly.
Yeah, because who knows what could have happened
Right.
if they hadn't intervened.
And when the first responders arrived,
Yeah.
Sheriff Wayne Ivey, he actually described it as one of the worst crime scenes
Oh gosh.
she had ever encountered.
I can't even imagine.
And the evidence against Gigante
Yeah.
was just overwhelming.
Right.
You have his emotionless confession.
Uh-huh.
You have the security footage placing him at the scene.
Yeah.
And then his roommate's testimony.
It's all there.
It all pointed to him.
So it sounds like a pretty open and shut case, right?
Yeah, I mean, initially it seemed that way.
Yeah.
He was arrested on 4 counts of first-degree premeditated murder.
Wow.
And because of the circumstances, the state announced that they were going to be seeking the death penalty.
That's intense.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a serious case, but even with all that evidence,
Right.
legal proceedings can be complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
So I imagine there's more to the story.
Well, yeah, you know, the defense team, they're arguing that he was mentally unstable
Okay.
at the time of the crimes.
So how does that work?
Right.
Because we talked about premeditation.
Yeah.
And his actions seemed very calculated.
That's the challenge for the defense, right? They
Yeah.
have to convince the court that even though there was planning and intention, that his mental state was such that he couldn't fully understand
Okay.
the consequences of his actions.
So it's like a diminished capacity kind of argument.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It's a really complex legal argument.
Yeah.
And it's going to be an uphill battle
Yeah.
because the prosecution has a very strong case.
Well, it's a tough situation all around.
It really is.
And it forces you to think about the bigger picture. You know, what leads someone to this point?
Right.
Could this tragedy have been prevented?
Those are the questions that we always ask, right?
Yeah,
And this case brings up so many issues.
it really does.
Domestic violence, mental health,
The warning signs.
the warning signs that we miss.
And what about those 2 young children?
Oh, gosh.
Their lives are forever changed by this.
Absolutely. And that's something that we can't forget.
What kind of support is there for children
Right.
who experience something this horrific?
That's a crucial question. And it highlights the need for, comprehensive trauma-informed care.
Yeah.
For young survivors of violence, they need long-term support to process this experience and hopefully build a future where they can thrive despite what they've been through.
This whole case has just been a roller coaster of emotions.
It really has.
You go from these chilling details of the crime to the bravery of that 6-year-old on FaceTime.
Right.
Then you have the legal complexities.
Yeah.
And the questions surrounding mental health and premeditation.
It's a lot to process.
It's a lot to process.
But I think it's important to use this case as a catalyst for discussion.
Absolutely.
What can we learn from this?
What can we do differently?
How can we as individuals and as a society become more aware of the warning signs and be more proactive in addressing them?
Because this case leaves us with more questions than answers.
It does.
But maybe by asking those questions, by shining a light on these difficult issues, we can start to make a difference.
I think you're absolutely right.
It's hard to shake that image of Gigante confessing, no remorse, no emotion.
It's haunting.
Just a cold admission of guilt.
It really speaks to the level of detachment he seemed to have from his victims, from the whole situation, really.
It makes you wonder what could push someone to that point.
Right. Is it just pure evil, or are we missing something?
Are there other factors at play?
I think it's rarely that simple. Just calling it evil, I think, can actually prevent us from understanding the complex factors.
The nuances.
Yeah, the nuances that contribute to violence.
And in this case, we see a history of violence. The troubled relationship with his daughter.
Yeah.
The potential mental health issues.
All these pieces of the puzzle.
It's like all these things just culminated in this horrific act.
It's a tragic combination.
This whole deep dive has been heavy.
It has.
Peeling back these layers of darkness.
Trying to make sense of something that ultimately might not make sense.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here.
For our listeners.
Yeah. These cases are complex. Yeah. They defy easy answers.
And they force us to confront uncomfortable truths.
About human nature.
We've talked about Gigante's past, the methodical nature of the crime.
Yeah, the legal complexity.
That 6-year-old's incredible bravery.
Just amazing.
And the questions about mental health and violence.
The warning sign?
The warning signs.
Our responsibility to do something.
It's left me with a lot to think about.
Me too.
And I hope it has for you listening as well.
I think as we wrap up, it's important to remember that while we've focused on this one specific case, it represents a much larger issue.
Of course, violence.
Violence, it touches so many lives.
Every day.
And we can't change the past, but we can work towards a future.
Where these tragedies are less frequent.
Where families are safe.
Where children can grow up without fear.
Exactly.
So to you listening, I want to leave you with this question. What can you do?
In your own life. In your community.
Yeah.
To promote understanding and empathy.
To support those who are struggling.
How can we create a world where violence isn't the answer?
It's a big question.
It is.
But it's one worth asking.
And even more importantly, worth acting on.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a tough one.
It has. But remember, knowledge is power.
Let's use what we've learned to make a difference.
Harry Alleman, a name synonymous with organized crime, violence, and a justice system pushed to its limits. This is the story of a feared enforcer whose rise to infamy and eventual fall shook Chicago to its core. From his humble beginnings to his unflinching loyalty to the Chicago outfit, Alleman's life was a chilling testament to the power of corruption and the fight to overcome it.
Harry Alleman, a name that echoes infamy in the annals of organized crime, was born on January 19, 1939, in Chicago, Illinois. Raised in a modest family with ties to Italian-American and Mexican-American heritage, Alleman's early life was a blend of cultural influences. His father, a Sicilian immigrant, worked as a laborer, while his mother maintained their household, growing up in the rough and tumble streets of Chicago's near West Side. young Harry was exposed to the realities of urban poverty and crime at an early age. By his teenage years, he had already begun his foray into petty criminal activities, displaying a proclivity for violence and a sharp mind for manipulation. Harry's formative years were heavily influenced by the mob-dominant environment of mid-20th century Chicago. The allure of quick money and power proved irresistible, and he soon began associating with local street gangs. By the late 1950s, Ailman had caught the attention of the Chicago Outfit, one of the most powerful organized crime syndicates in the United States. His ruthless efficiency and unflinching loyalty earned him a position within the outfit, marking the start of his notorious career. In the 1970s, Ailman rose to prominence as a feared enforcer for the outfit. His reputation was built on a chilling skill set: extortion, loan sharking, and, most infamously, contract killings. Among his earliest confirmed victims was William Logan, a union steward who dared to cross the outfit. Logan's death in 1972 was emblematic of Aleman's modus operandi: swift, brutal, and meticulously planned. Witnesses described a masked gunman who left the scene with cold precision, and rumors quickly swirled that Ailman was responsible. Aleman's list of alleged victims grew over the years, though his involvement was often shrouded in fear and silence. Authorities suspected him in dozens of murders, many linked to the outfit's efforts to maintain control over Chicago's lucrative illegal operations. His victims were not just rivals but also individuals who posed a threat to the mob's interests. This included informants, uncooperative business owners, and even members of law enforcement who dared to challenge the outfit's influence. What set Ailman apart was his chilling demeanor. He carried out his work with an unsettling calmness, earning him the nickname "the man with no nerves." This reputation for fearlessness extended beyond his victims. It intimidated witnesses and even members of the criminal underworld. The mere mention of his name was enough to silence potential informants, complicating law enforcement's efforts to gather evidence against him. Despite his infamy, Aleman's personal motivations remained enigmatic. Some speculated that he was driven by a quest for power and respect within the outfit, while others believed he derived satisfaction from the act of killing itself. His loyalty to the mob, however, was never in question. Ailman viewed himself as a soldier in a larger organization, adhering to its code of silence and unwavering allegiance. His involvement in the outfit's operations extended beyond Chicago. Aleman's activities were tied to the syndicate's nationwide network, including partnerships with other crime families in New York and Las Vegas. His ability to adapt to different environments and maintain secrecy made him a valuable asset to the outfit. One of the most shocking aspects of Ailman's career was his ability to evade justice. Despite being linked to numerous crimes, he avoided prosecution for decades. This was partly due to the pervasive corruption within the justice system during that era. Law enforcement officials and judges were often compromised, allowing figures like Ailman to operate with impunity. Aleman's personal life was equally enigmatic. Married with children, he maintained a facade of normalcy that belied his violent career. Those close to him described him as a devoted family man, a stark contrast to the fearsome image he projected in the underworld. This duality added to the mystique surrounding his persona. As Ailman's reputation grew, so did the pressure from law enforcement. The federal government launched multiple investigations into the Chicago outfit, targeting its key members. Aleman's name frequently surfaced in these inquiries, but concrete evidence remained elusive. Witnesses were too afraid to testify, and the outfit's code of silence ensured that internal information rarely leaked. By the early 1970s, Ailman had become one of the most feared enforcers in the country. His influence within the outfit was unmatched, and his ability to intimidate rivals and law enforcement alike made him virtually untouchable. However, his reign was not without challenges. Internal power struggles within the outfit occasionally put him at odds with other members, though his loyalty to the organization remained steadfast. The 1970s saw increasing scrutiny from federal and local authorities as law enforcement intensified its efforts to dismantle organized crime in Chicago. Aleman's name frequently surfaced in investigations, but securing a conviction proved elusive. Witnesses were either too afraid to testify or mysteriously disappeared, and juries often acquitted him due to lack of evidence. However, his luck began to run out in 1975, when he was charged with the murder of William Logan. Aleman's trial for Logan's murder became a landmark case in the annals of American criminal justice. Prosecutors were determined to make an example of him, but their efforts were hindered by a corrupt judicial system. The presiding judge, Frank Wilson, was later revealed to have been bribed by the outfit to ensure Aleman's acquittal. In 1977, Aleman walked free, further cementing his reputation as untouchable. The tainted trial prompted widespread outrage and led to significant reforms aimed at combating judicial corruption. For Aleman, however, the respite was temporary. In the 1990s, advances in forensic science and a renewed focus on cold cases reopened the investigation into Logan's murder. With new evidence and the support of witnesses willing to break their silence, prosecutors charged Aleman once more. This time the outcome was different. In 1997, Aleman was convicted of Logan's murder in a retrial, marking a historic moment in the fight against organized crime. It was the first time in U.S. history that a defendant was retried for murder after an acquittal, a feat made possible by the argument that the original trial was invalid due to judicial bribery. Aleman's conviction signaled the end of his reign of terror. Sentenced to life in prison, he spent his remaining years behind bars, a shadow of the once feared enforcer. His downfall was a testament to the resilience of justice in the face of corruption and fear, and his story remains a cautionary tale about the destructive power of organized crime. Life in prison was a stark contrast to the power Aleman once wielded. Isolated from his former allies and stripped of his influence, he reportedly reflected on his choices, though he maintained a stoic silence about his crimes. His incarceration marked a turning point for law enforcement's efforts to tackle organized crime, inspiring further investigations and prosecutions. The retrial and conviction of Aleman were celebrated as a victory for the justice system. It highlighted the importance of persistence in the face of corruption and underscored the need for systemic reforms. For the victims' families, the verdict brought a sense of closure, though the scars of Aleman's actions lingered. Aleman's downfall also served as a cautionary tale within the criminal underworld. His conviction demonstrated that even the most feared figures could be brought to justice, sending a powerful message to others involved in organized crime. It disrupted the perception of invincibility that many mobsters relied upon to maintain control. The case against Aleman also shed light on the broader network of corruption that had enabled organized crime to thrive. The exposure of compromised officials and systemic weaknesses spurred significant changes in law enforcement strategies. Task forces were created to specifically target organized crime, and public awareness campaigns emphasized the importance of cooperation with authorities. Despite the legal victories, Aleman's legacy remained a dark chapter in Chicago's history. His actions left a trail of devastation, and the fear he instilled in communities lingered long after his imprisonment. For many, his story symbolized the destructive impact of unchecked power and the enduring struggle to uphold justice. In his final years, Aleman's health declined, and he passed away in 2010 while still incarcerated. His death marked the end of an era for the Chicago outfit, but the lessons from his life and crimes continued to resonate. The reforms inspired by his case paved the way for a more robust justice system, though the fight against organized crime remains ongoing. Aleman's story serves as a reminder of the complex interplay between power, corruption, and justice. His rise and fall encapsulate the challenges faced by law enforcement and the resilience required to overcome them. For those who study his life, Aleman remains a figure of both infamy and historical significance, a symbol of the enduring battle against organized crime.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Deep Dive. Today, we're going deep into the world of the Chicago outfit and one of their most notorious hitmen, Harry Elliman. Get ready. This one's a wild ride.
Yeah, the outfit's impact, can't be overstated. They were a force to be reckoned with, a dark reflection of American corporate, power, with this grip on the city that lasted for decades.
Yeah, they definitely weren't playing around. And Harry Elliman, born in 1939, was a product of this very environment. Our sources paint this picture of Chicago in the 30s and 50s, this city where poverty and violence were just rampant, and the outfit was everywhere.
His background, it's interesting. Elliman came from a family with both Italian-American and Mexican-American roots.
Wow.
Growing up in a neighborhood where the outfit was practically woven into life. Imagine seeing this kind of illicit power as a kid. It must have felt like a twisted version of the American dream.
Right. Like a recipe for, you can kind of see how things would head in a certain direction.
Right.
The sources mentioned him getting involved in petty crime early on. But there's something about his rise within the outfit that's so fascinating. He wasn't just another thug. He became one of their top enforcers.
He was ruthlessly efficient, fiercely loyal to the outfit, and just gifted, I guess you could say, when it came to violence. He orchestrated these hits with chilling meticulousness.
It's scary.
It really is.
The sources talk about this one case in particular, the 1972 murder of William Logan, a Union steward who dared to cross the outfit. Brutal hit, carried out by a masked gunman, and immediately everyone's pointing at Elliman. But as with, many outfit crimes, concrete proof was elusive.
The code of silence. It was their most powerful weapon. They instilled fear in anyone who even thought about speaking out.
It's like something out of a mob movie, but way worse. Speaking of chilling, there's that nickname, the man with no nerves. That's more than just a name, right?
Right. It was a tool. Imagine the impact on witnesses, on rivals, even on his own crew. This reputation, unflappable, totally devoid of fear. It was a weapon.
Makes you wonder how he managed to operate for decades with basically total impunity. We're talking multiple suspected hits. The sources say he seemed untouchable. Was the justice system in Chicago really that corrupt?
It was a perfect storm of corruption. You had officials on the outfit's payroll, widespread fear of reprisal, and a culture of silence that was basically impossible to crack. The outfit didn't just target their enemies. They went after anyone who posed a threat. Witnesses, informants, even law enforcement.
Wow. The sources detail this one trial, 1975, the William Logan case. Prosecutors had what seemed like a strong case, but the judge, Frank Wilson, who was later found to be corrupt, made sure Elliman walked free.
That trial, it was a catalyst for change. The level of corruption, the way it was just flaunted, ignited public outrage, and it led to some crucial reforms aimed at combating judicial corruption.
Incredible. But the story, it doesn't end there, right? The sources go on to describe Elliman's eventual retrial in the 90s, this landmark case. That really shook things up.
Yeah, it marked the first time in U.S. history that a defendant was retried for murder after an acquittal based on a bribed judge. Elliman's conviction sent shockwaves through the system.
Like the system, finally correcting itself, even if it took decades. But this retrial and its implications raises this fascinating question. How did the prosecution finally manage to secure a conviction after all that time?
So you had witnesses who were finally ready to break the code of silence. Decades had passed, and some felt safe enough to come forward. Their fear finally outweighed by a desire for justice.
It was like an immense courage.
Oh, absolutely. And there was another element at play. Forensic technology. It had advanced significantly since the first trial. New techniques allowed investigators to re-examine old evidence, uncovering details that were previously hidden.
Like the past was finally catching up with Elliman. But I have to admit, I'm still struggling to grasp the psychology of a hitman. What makes someone capable of such calculated violence? Was there something inherently different about Elliman?
It's a complex question. Some experts believe that certain personality traits, like a lack of empathy or a high tolerance for risk, can predispose individuals to violence.
So are we talking nature or nurture here? Were these guys born this way, or did their environment shape them?
Probably a combination of both. While some individuals may have a genetic predisposition towards aggression, their upbringing and social context also play a crucial role. In Elliman's case, growing up surrounded by poverty and witnessing the outfit's influence undoubtedly shaped his trajectory.
The sources describe him as almost robotic in his efficiency, completely dedicated to the outfit's goals. Was it purely about power, or did he derive some kind of twisted satisfaction from his actions?
It's tough to say. He maintained this stoic silence about his past. Even in prison, perhaps he compartmentalized. separating his personal life from his criminal activities, or maybe he fully embraced the persona of the ruthless enforcer, burying any feelings of guilt or remorse.
It's a chilling thought. The sources also mention that he had a family, a wife and kids. It's hard to reconcile that image of a devoted family man with the cold-blooded killer he was.
It's a stark contrast. Those who knew him, outside of his mob life, described him as a loving husband and father. It speaks to the level of compartmentalization these individuals had to maintain. This double life, this facade of normalcy.
What duality must have taken a toll on him
Yeah.
and on those around him. What about the impact of his actions on Chicago itself? Did his reign of terror leave a lasting mark on the city?
Alaman's legacy. It's complex. On one hand, his crimes instilled fear in communities, leaving a sense of unease that lingered for years. But on the other hand, his downfall, particularly the landmark retrial, brought a wave of reforms and renewed efforts to combat organized crime.
Like his case served as a wake-up call.
Yeah, exposing the vulnerabilities of the system and the need for change.
But even with Alaman behind bars, the outfit's grip on the city was still strong, right? They weren't going to simply disappear overnight. What were the lasting effects of their influence on Chicago?
It went far beyond the violence and intimidation. They had infiltrated various sectors of society, from labor unions to politics. This web of corruption eroded public trust and left a scar on the city's fabric.
So how did Chicago begin to heal from this? Was it simply a matter of time? Or did it require more proactive efforts to dismantle the outfit's power structure?
It was a combination of factors. Law enforcement agencies developed new strategies to target organized crime, focusing on disrupting their financial networks and infiltrating their ranks. But just as importantly, a cultural shift was taking place.
What do you mean by that?
People were growing tired of living in fear. The code of silence was slowly cracking as more individuals found the courage to speak out against the outfit. There was a growing sense that Chicago deserved better, that the city could reclaim its future from the grip of organized crime.
That's inspiring. A testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of oppression. But the story of the Chicago outfit, with its deep roots and pervasive influence, reminds us that this struggle is far from over.
Oh, absolutely. Organized crime, it's a shape-shifting beast, constantly adapting to new opportunities, exploiting vulnerabilities. While the traditional power structures may have weakened, the underlying conditions that allow them to flourish, poverty, inequality, corruption, they still persist.
It's a sobering reminder that we can't afford to be complacent. The fight against organized crime requires constant vigilance and a commitment to addressing the root causes that allow it to thrive.
You got it. Alaman's story. It's not just a historical account, it's a cautionary tale. It reminds us that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing process, requiring a collective effort to dismantle the systems that allow organized crime to flourish.
And it highlights the importance of individual courage, of those who dared to break the code of silence and speak truth to power.
Precisely. Their actions paved the way for change, proving that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, the fight for justice can prevail.
Alaman's story is a dark chapter in Chicago's history, but it also illuminates a path towards a brighter future, a future where communities are empowered, justice is upheld, and the grip of organized crime is loosened.
And I think that's a powerful message to carry forward as we continue to explore the complexities of organized crime and its impact on society.
Well said. So Alaman dies in prison in 2010. His reign of terror is over, but the questions surrounding his life and his legacy linger. What can we learn from his story, from the rise and fall of a notorious hitman?
His story serves as a stark reminder of the human capacity for both good and evil, for violence and redemption.
It's a reminder that the battle against organized crime, it isn't just about taking down kingpins or disrupting criminal enterprises. It's about addressing the underlying societal issues that create fertile ground for these organizations to take root.
You're absolutely right. It's about fostering a culture of accountability, transparency, and justice, where individuals feel empowered to speak out against corruption and demand a better future for their communities.
And it's about remembering those who fought for that better future, those who risked their lives, to expose the truth and challenge the grip of organized crime.
Their bravery serves as an inspiration, reminding us that even in the darkest of times, hope for change persists.
Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive into the life and crimes of Harry Alaman. But before we wrap things up, there's one more aspect of his story that I think is worth exploring: the lasting impact of his actions on those who are closest to him, his family. It's one thing to read about the violence and the intimidation, but to think about the families, caught in the crossfire, just adds this whole other layer of tragedy to this story.
It's a side of organized crime that I think often gets overlooked. The impact on innocent family members, the wives, the children, they're the ones who end up living with the consequences of choices they didn't make.
Right. The sources mention Elliman's family, but they don't go into much detail. Yeah. What can you tell us about their experience? How did they navigate this double life, this dark secret at the heart of their family?
Just imagine the emotional toll, living with that constant fear of reprisal, knowing that your loved one is responsible for these unimaginable acts. It's a burden no family should have to bear.
It's a lot. Did Elliman's family ever speak publicly about their experience? Did they share any insights into his character, into the man behind the mask of the hitman?
They mostly stayed private, which is understandable. But there are little glimpses in the sources, anecdotes from people who know the family, that paint this picture of a man trying to reconcile his two worlds.
It's so fascinating, this idea of compartmentalization, the ability to separate the personal from the professional, even when the profession is brutality.
Right. It makes you wonder about the psychology of it all. Were they just masters of deception, or did they truly believe they could keep these worlds separate?
I mean, it raises these big questions about the nature of evil, right? Can someone be capable of such horrific acts and still be a loving father, a devoted husband?
It's a question that I think philosophers have been grappling with for centuries. And I don't know if we'll ever have a definitive answer. But exploring these complexities, I think that's crucial to understanding the motivations and justifications of those involved in organized crime.
So Elliman dies in prison in 2010. What's the final takeaway here from his life and crimes? Is it a story of justice prevailing, or a cautionary tale about the enduring power of organized crime?
I think it's both. On the one hand, you have his conviction and the dismantling of much of the Chicago outfit. It demonstrates the resilience of the justice system, but it's also a reminder that the fight against organized crime is never truly over. Their methods may evolve, but the core motivations, power, greed, control, they're always there.
It's a powerful reminder that we can't afford to turn a blind eye to the forces that breed corruption and violence.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Elliman's life serves as a warning, a reminder that the pursuit of justice requires constant vigilance, a commitment to transparency and accountability, and the courage to speak truth to power.
And the courage to speak truth to power. Well said. This deep dive has taken us from the streets of 1950s Chicago to the halls of justice, from the mind of a hitman to the families who dared to stand against him.
A story of power and corruption, violence and fear, but also resilience, justice, and the hope for a better tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of the Chicago outfit. We'll be back soon with another deep dive, but until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking the truth wherever it may lead.
Harold Shipman, known as the Deadly Doctor, shattered the trust of his community with one of the most chilling crime sprees in history. How did a trusted family physician become one of the most prolific serial killers the world has ever seen? This is the harrowing tale of Harold Shipman's double life.
Harold Shipman, born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, England, grew up in a working-class family. His early life was marked by an unusual bond with his mother, Vera, who played a significant role in shaping his personality. She instilled in him a sense of superiority and self-reliance, which would later manifest in his professional life. Tragedy struck Harold's life at the age of 17 when Vera succumbed to terminal lung cancer. During her illness, she received morphine injections for pain relief, a detail that would leave a lasting impression on the young Harold. Observing the power of a doctor's control over life and death likely sowed the seeds for his future crimes. Despite the family's modest means, Shipman excelled academically and won a scholarship to Leeds University Medical School. He graduated in 1970 and soon began his medical career, showing promise as a dedicated and competent physician. However, beneath the surface, a darker side of his character simmered. In 1974, Shipman took his first general practice position in Todmorden, Yorkshire. It wasn't long before his facade began to crack. He was caught forging prescriptions for pethidine, a powerful painkiller, for his own use. The scandal resulted in his dismissal and a stint in rehab, but Shipman's career was far from over. By the late 1970s, Shipman had rebuilt his life and career, moving to Hyde, Greater Manchester, where he became a trusted figure in the community. Patients admired his caring demeanor and willingness to make house calls, a rarity among doctors at the time. What the community didn't know was that Shipman's charm concealed a predatory nature. He began targeting elderly women, exploiting their trust and vulnerability. Over the years, Shipman's actions escalated from isolated incidents to a calculated and methodical killing spree. Using his position as a doctor, Shipman administered lethal doses of diamorphine, the medical-grade form of heroin. His victims were often frail and elderly, making their deaths appear natural. Shipman meticulously falsified medical records to cover his tracks. By the mid-1990s, Harold Shipman had cemented his reputation as a beloved community doctor. Patients and colleagues were oblivious to his dark secret, as his methods left little room for suspicion. It wasn't until he grew more reckless that the truth began to unravel. A pattern emerged as families noticed the high number of deaths among Shipman's patients. He preyed on those who lived alone or had minimal family involvement, ensuring fewer questions were asked. Shipman's arrogance grew alongside his body count. Harold Shipman was more than a doctor. He was a manipulator, a predator hiding in plain sight. His actions would eventually make him one of history's most prolific serial killers. But how did his crimes finally come to light? The answer lies in the case of Kathleen Grundy. Kathleen Grundy, a healthy 81-year-old and well-respected member of the Hyde community, was one of Shipman's patients. On June 24, 1998, Grundy was found dead in her home, reportedly from natural causes. Shipman himself signed her death certificate, citing old age as the reason. Shortly after her death, a shocking discovery was made. Grundy's daughter, Angela Woodruff, a solicitor, found a suspicious will among her mother's documents. The will left the entirety of Kathleen's estate, valued at nearly £400,000, to Harold Shipman. Woodruff, knowing her mother's meticulous nature and their close relationship, immediately suspected foul play. She took the will to the police, prompting an investigation that would unravel Shipman's web of deceit. Exhumation of Kathleen Grundy's body revealed lethal levels of diamorphine. The once revered doctor became the prime suspect in what was shaping up to be a horrifying case. Investigators began digging deeper into Shipman's past. A pattern of suspicious deaths emerged. Over the years, an unusually high number of Shipman's patients had died under his care, often shortly after a home visit. Many were cremated, eliminating physical evidence. However, Shipman's arrogance left a trail of incriminating documents. Medical records showed discrepancies, with Shipman altering details to match his narrative. In several cases, he claimed patients were terminally ill when they were not. Investigators also discovered a stash of jewelry belonging to his victims, further implicating him. In September 1998, Shipman was arrested and charged with 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. The trial, held in October 1999, gripped the nation as the full extent of Shipman's crimes came to light. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including testimony from families, forensic experts, and colleagues. Shipman's demeanor in court, marked by cold detachment, only added to the public's horror. In January 2000, Harold Shipman was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He showed no remorse, maintaining his innocence despite the mountain of evidence against him. The Shipman case sent shockwaves through the medical community, leading to significant changes in the oversight of doctors in the UK. The General Medical Council introduced stricter protocols, and the practice of cremation authorization underwent reform. Harold Shipman's crimes left an indelible scar on the nation, raising uncomfortable questions about trust in the medical profession. How could such a trusted figure exploit his position to commit such heinous acts? In 2004, Shipman was found dead in his prison cell, having taken his own life. His death brought little solace to the families of his victims, who were left grappling with the devastation he caused. The story of Harold Shipman serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers posed by those who abuse positions of trust. Even now, the exact number of Shipman's victims remains unknown. Estimates suggest he may have killed over 200 people, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in history. His legacy is one of betrayal, heartbreak, and profound loss.
All right, so have you ever felt like you really knew someone? Like truly understand them? Well, today's deep dive might just make you reconsider, because we're going deep into the story of Harold Shipman, one of the most prolific serial killers in history. And the truly disturbing part, he was a doctor.
Yeah, what makes this case so fascinating and disturbing is that it shatters our expectations about trust, especially in healthcare, where we're often at our most vulnerable.
Exactly. We've got excerpts from a longer text about Shipman's life and crimes. And what we're aiming for today is to go beyond the headlines. We're not just here for the gruesome details. We want to understand the how and the why, what made this man tick, what went wrong, and what does this case say about the nature of trust and vulnerability.
Yeah, it's a story that makes you think twice about the assumptions we make, even about those in positions of authority.
Okay, let's start with Shipman's early life. The sources highlight this really unusual bond he had with his mother, Vera. He seemed to instill in him this sense of superiority, like he was somehow above the rules.
Yeah, that's a key point. You often see this kind of distorted self-perception in individuals who commit these kinds of crimes, this belief that they're exempt from consequences, that they're somehow special.
And here's where it gets really interesting. His mother died of cancer when he was just 17. She was using morphine for pain, and the sources suggest that witnessing this, seeing the power of these drugs firsthand, might have had a deep psychological impact on him.
It's certainly a possibility worth exploring. There's a whole body of research on how witnessing death, particularly at a young age, can be a deeply formative experience. And when you add in the element of powerful pain medication, the potential for a distorted fascination with life and death becomes even more pronounced.
Right. It's like those early experiences planted a seed that would later blossom into something truly dark. So Shipman goes to medical school, becomes a doctor, seems promising at first. But then, bam, the pethidine forgery scandal hits. He's caught red-handed prescribing this potent painkiller to himself.
Yeah, and this early episode raises a critical question. Was this a precursor to the horrific acts he would later commit? Was this a sign that something was fundamentally wrong? The fact that he abused his position of power so early on for personal gain is a huge red flag.
Right, it's like a crack in the facade, a glimpse into the darkness that lay beneath. And the scary thing is, he managed to bounce back from this scandal, rebuild his career, and ultimately end up in Hyde, where he became this beloved, trusted doctor, making house calls, caring for the elderly, the whole image of the perfect small-town physician.
And that's where the true insidiousness of this case lies. He was a master manipulator, carefully cultivating this image of the caring doctor, while simultaneously carrying out these horrific acts. The duality is just mind-boggling.
It's terrifying to think that the people who trusted him most, the ones who saw him as a pillar of the community, were actually the ones in the most danger. According to the sources, this is where his killing spree really starts to ramp up. And his victims, primarily elderly women, often those living alone or without strong support systems.
Yeah, this choice of victims is a pattern we see time and time again in these angel of death cases. They prey on the most vulnerable, those who are least likely to be missed, or whose deaths might be easily dismissed as natural causes. It's a chillingly calculated approach.
It's heartbreaking to think about the level of trust these people placed in him. Trust that he then weaponized against them. He was playing God, deciding who lived and who died, all the while maintaining this carefully constructed facade of respectability.
And the way he went about it, with the diamorphine injections, making the deaths appear natural, and then meticulously falsifying medical records to cover his tracks. It's a level of premeditation and cunning that's almost incomprehensible.
So the question is, how did he get away with it for so long? Was it just his charisma and manipulative skills, or were there systemic failures that allowed him to operate under the radar for years?
That's a question that haunts the medical community to this day, and it's one we'll need to explore further as we delve deeper into the investigation and the aftermath of this horrifying case.
Because it makes you wonder, were there any warning signs that were missed? Could something have been done to stop him sooner?
These are difficult questions, but they're essential questions to ask if we want to learn from this tragedy and prevent something like this from ever happening again.
And this brings us to a turning point in the case of Kathleen Grundy. This is where Shipman's carefully constructed world begins to crumble.
Kathleen Grundy's case exposed a critical flaw in Shipman's otherwise meticulously crafted plan: greed.
So tell us about Kathleen Grundy and how her case changed everything.
Well, Kathleen Grundy was a healthy 81-year-old widow. She was well respected in the community, active, and had a family who was very involved in her life. In short, she wasn't the typical Shipman victim.
And yet she ended up dead, just like so many others. But something was different this time, wasn't it?
Yes. After her death, a discovery was made that would ultimately unravel Shipman's entire web of deception. Her daughter, Angela Woodruff, a solicitor, found a will amongst her mother's belongings.
And I bet I know what that will said.
You guessed it. The will named Harold Shipman as the sole beneficiary of Kathleen Grundy's estate. He had forged a will, attempting to inherit nearly £400,000.
He got greedy, didn't he? Stepped outside his usual pattern.
Exactly. And this was his fatal error. Up until this point, he had maintained a consistent pattern of killing, falsifying records, and moving on. But with Grundy, he deviated from his script, driven by a desire for financial gain.
And thankfully, Kathleen Grundy had a daughter who was not only sharp, but also deeply suspicious. She knew something wasn't right and immediately went to the police.
Angela Woodruff's actions were the catalyst that brought Shipman down. If not for her persistence and determination to uncover the truth, his crimes might have continued undetected.
Wow. It's incredible how one seemingly small detail, a forged will, can unravel an entire web of deception.
It's a testament to the importance of paying attention, of trusting your instincts, and of never giving up in the pursuit of justice.
So last time we left off with the case of Kathleen Grundy, and how her daughter's sharp eye really started to unravel Shipman's facade. It's almost unbelievable how one forged will could bring down this whole house of cards.
It is a powerful reminder that even the most meticulous criminal can make mistakes. And in Shipman's case, this one mistake would trigger a chain of events that would ultimately expose the true extent of his crimes.
So the police start digging into Shipman's past, and things escalate pretty quickly. Exhumations, analysis of medical records, the discovery of jewelry belonging to his victims. It's almost like peeling back the layers of a nightmare.
And with each layer, the evidence against Shipman becomes more damning. A clear pattern of suspicious deaths, a trail of altered medical records, and then the forensic evidence from the exhumations, the presence of lethal doses of diamorphine, essentially heroin in the bodies of his victims, removes any doubt. These were not natural deaths.
It's mind-boggling how this went on for so long. The sheer scale of it. Potentially over 200 victims. It's almost too much to comprehend. And what's even more disturbing is that throughout the trial, Shipman remained completely cold and detached, showing no remorse whatsoever.
That lack of remorse, that utter disregard for human life, is a chilling hallmark of psychopathy. It's one of the most unsettling aspects of this whole case. How could someone inflict so much pain and suffering without a shred of guilt or empathy?
It's like trying to understand a black hole. A complete void of human emotion. But we have to try, because if we can understand what motivated him, what drove him to commit these horrific acts, maybe we can learn something, prevent something like this from happening again.
You're absolutely right. So let's dive into the psychology of Harold Shipman. What can we glean from the sources about his potential motivations?
Well, we talked about that incident early in his career, the pethidine forgery.
Yeah.
It seems like there was this underlying struggle with control, a willingness to break the rules to get what he wanted.
Yes. And some experts believe this need for control, for power, might have been amplified by witnessing his mother's death at such a young age. Seeing her suffering, her dependence on morphine for pain relief, could have had a profound psychological effect.
Like he became fixated on the power of life and death, on having that ultimate control. And what better profession to fulfill that desire than medicine?
Doctors hold a unique position of authority. They have access to medications, to vulnerable patients. And they're often seen as infallible figures. For someone like Shipman, with his warped sense of self-importance and his need for control, it could have been the perfect storm.
It's terrifying to think that the very profession that's meant to heal and protect could be twisted in such a dark way. The fact that he targeted the elderly, the most vulnerable members of society, makes it even more horrific.
That speaks to another aspect of his psychology, the lack of empathy. He saw his victims not as human beings deserving of care and compassion, but as pawns in his twisted game of power and control.
It's like he dehumanized them, reduced them to objects that he could manipulate and dispose of at will. And the meticulousness of his methods, the way he planned and executed these killings, it's almost as if he took a perverse pride in his ability to deceive and control.
That's a chilling observation, but one that rings true. This wasn't just about satisfying a basic urge to kill. This was about power, about playing God, about being the ultimate arbiter of life and death.
And he almost got away with it too. For years, he operated under the radar, hiding in plain sight. Which begs the question, what were the systemic failures that allowed him to operate for so long? Was it just his charm and manipulative skills, or were there larger issues at play?
That's a question that has haunted the medical community ever since Shipman's crimes were exposed. While he was undoubtedly a master manipulator, there were also systemic weaknesses that he exploited.
Such as?
Well, for one, there was a lack of oversight in the prescribing of controlled drugs. Shipman was able to obtain large quantities of diamorphine without raising any red flags.
And what about the death certificates? He was falsifying those too, right? Making the deaths look natural.
Exactly. And at the time, there wasn't a robust system for scrutinizing death certificates, particularly for deaths that occurred at home. There was a certain level of trust placed in doctors that Shipman was able to exploit.
So it's a combination of individual failings and systemic vulnerabilities that allowed him to operate for so long. It's a sobering thought, but one that we need to grapple with if we want to prevent future tragedies.
Absolutely. The Shipman case forced the medical community to confront some uncomfortable truths about itself. It sparked a wave of reforms aimed at strengthening oversight, improving communication, and creating a culture of accountability.
What were some of the key changes implemented after the Shipman case?
One of the most significant changes was the introduction of more stringent regulations for the prescribing and dispensing of controlled drugs. There's now much greater scrutiny, more checks and balances to prevent doctors from obtaining large quantities of these drugs without proper justification.
So it's harder for someone to operate under the radar like Shipman did.
In theory, yes. There's also greater awareness now of the potential for abuse within the healthcare system. It's not about assuming every doctor is a monster, but about having safeguards in place, about not being afraid to ask questions.
And what about the cremation procedures? Because Shipman often had his victims cremated, which destroyed evidence.
That's a crucial point. The Shipman case led to reforms in cremation authorization as well. Now there's a more rigorous process, involving multiple doctors, and more thorough scrutiny of death certificates.
It's almost like the system itself had to learn from this tragedy, adapt to prevent something like this from happening again.
Precisely. And this speaks to a broader point. While we can never fully eliminate the risk of evil, we can certainly learn from past mistakes and make it harder for those who seek to harm others.
So it's about being informed, being aware of the potential for abuse, but also about not letting fear paralyze us.
Exactly. Trust is still essential, especially in healthcare, but it needs to be balanced with a healthy dose of skepticism.
And maybe that's one of the most enduring lessons of the Harold Shipman case. It's a wake-up call. That reminds us that even in the most trusted professions, there can be darkness lurking. And that it's up to each of us to be vigilant, to ask questions, and to hold those in power accountable.
It's a difficult but necessary conversation, and it's one that we must continue to have if we want to create a safer, more just world.
Well said. But let's not lose sight of the victims in all of this. The families who lost loved ones, whose lives were forever shattered by Shipman's actions.
Their stories are a powerful reminder of the human cost of evil, the pain and devastation that ripple outward from these acts of violence.
It's important that we honor their memory, that we learn from their suffering, and that we work to create a world where such tragedies are less likely to occur. But what about Shipman himself? He never confessed, never explained his actions. What happened to him after his conviction?
In January 2000, Shipman was convicted on 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial and never offered any explanation for his crimes.
It's like he took his secrets to the grave, leaving behind a trail of devastation and unanswered questions.
That's a common theme in cases like this. The perpetrators often refuse to acknowledge the pain they've caused, leaving the families of their victims grappling with a profound sense of loss and unresolved grief.
It's a stark reminder that justice, even when it's served, can't always heal the wounds of the past.
No, it can't. But it can serve as a starting point for healing, for accountability, and for a renewed commitment to preventing future tragedies. And the Shipman case, as horrific as it was, did lead to significant changes.
It's like a silver lining in the darkest of clouds, those reforms, those changes in the healthcare system. They represent a legacy of sorts, a testament to the victims, and to the unwavering determination to learn from this tragedy.
You could say that. The Shipman case may have shattered our trust in those we thought we could rely on. But it also sparked a movement for greater transparency, accountability, vigilance.
And that's a legacy worth fighting for. So as we delve further into the lasting impact of this case, let's keep in mind that the story of Harold Shipman is not just about the darkness of one man's actions, but also about the resilience of the human spirit and our collective capacity to learn, to adapt, and to fight for a better, safer world. So we've been talking about the horrific crimes of Harold Shipman, this seemingly ordinary doctor who turned out to be one of history's most prolific serial killers. It's a story that makes you question everything you think you know about trust, especially in the context of healthcare.
It's a case that forces us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about human nature and the systems we rely on to keep us safe. Because while Shipman was clearly a master manipulator, there were also systemic failures. That allowed him to operate undetected for so long.
And we've touched on some of the reforms that were put in place after his crimes were exposed, like stricter regulations for prescribing controlled drugs and more rigorous procedures for cremation authorizations. But what about the bigger picture? How has this case changed the way we think about healthcare, about trust, about the very nature of evil?
Well, the Shipman case was a watershed moment, not just in the UK, but globally. It really shattered that naive belief that all doctors are inherently trustworthy and forced us to acknowledge that power, even in the hands of those sworn to heal, can be corrupted.
It's like this case ripped the blinders off, exposed a dark underbelly that many people didn't even want to consider. So how do we move forward from something like this? How do we balance the need for trust with the need for vigilance? especially when it comes to our health and well-being.
It's a delicate balance for sure, and there's no easy answer. But I think one of the most important takeaways from the Shipman case is that we can't afford to be passive. We need to be informed, engaged, and empowered to advocate for ourselves and our loved ones.
So it's not about being suspicious of every doctor we encounter, but about being aware of the potential for abuse and feeling comfortable asking questions, seeking second opinions, and generally being proactive about our healthcare.
Exactly. It's about having a healthy skepticism, trusting your gut instincts, and not being afraid to speak up if something feels wrong. And this applies beyond healthcare, really, to any situation where there's an imbalance of power.
Right, that's a great point. Whether it's in education, religious institutions, government, or any other area where we place our trust in authority figures, the Shipman case serves as a stark reminder that we can't afford to be complacent.
Yeah. It's about fostering a culture of questioning, of critical thinking, of not blindly accepting things just because they come from someone in a position of authority. We need to encourage people to think for themselves, to trust their instincts, and to speak truth to power.
It's like that old saying, trust but verify. We need to trust, but we also need to be discerning, to ask questions and to hold those in power accountable. And that's something we can all do, regardless of our background or profession.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture of transparency, accountability, and vigilance. It's about empowering individuals and communities to be active participants in their own safety and well-being.
And I think it's also about remembering the victims, those whose lives were tragically cut short by Shipman's actions. We can honor their memory by working to create a world where such tragedies are less likely to occur.
You're absolutely right. The victims and their families deserve justice, not just in the form of Shipman's conviction, but also in the form of lasting change, of a system that is more resilient to abuse and more responsive to the needs of the vulnerable.
So in a way, the legacy of this horrific case can be one of positive change, of a collective awakening to the potential for darkness, even in the most trusted corners of society. It's a reminder that we must always be vigilant, that we must never take trust for granted, and that we must work together to create a safer, more just world for everyone.
Well said. The story of Harold Shipman is a chilling tale of deception and betrayal, but it's also a story of resilience, of the power of individuals to speak truth to power, and of the enduring human spirit that seeks to learn from tragedy and build a better future.
This deep dive into the Shipman case has been a heavy one, but incredibly important. It's a story that stays with you, that makes you think differently about the world around you. And that's what the deep dive is all about.
It's about exploring those complex issues, those dark corners of human experience, and coming away with a deeper understanding, a renewed sense of purpose, and a commitment to making a difference.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We encourage you to continue your own exploration of this case and the broader issues it raises.
Remember, knowledge is power, and together we can make a difference.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay vigilant.